The serrated blade whistled past Ariana's ear, embedding itself deep into the concrete wall behind her with a bone-jarring impact that sent chips. Music of debris cascading to the floor. Blood trickled from her temple, where another knife had grazed her. Moments before, the warm crimson liquid, mixing with the dust and grime that coated her blue skin like war paint, she rolled behind a massive rusted metal beam that had once supported some long-forgotten piece of industrial equipment, her chest heaving as she pressed herself against the cold steel. The silver wedding dress they had forced her to wear was torn and stained beyond recognition, hanging in tatters that caught on every piece of debris in the godforsaken underground maze. Each rip in the fabric felt like a small victory, another chain broken in the elaborate prison they had tried to build around her. Cole Martinez's voice echoed through the abandoned laboratory complex, like the hunting call of some apex predator that had finally cornered its prey. The sound bounced off concrete walls and rusted pipes, distorting and multiplying until it seemed like his voice was coming from everywhere at once. Each word dripped with possessive fury and something darker, the rage of a man whose carefully acquired property had dared to think for itself. You can't run forever, my beautiful wife. The ceremony made it official under Nevada state law. You belong to me now, body and soul, and I always collect what's mine. The harder you make me work for it, the more I'm going to enjoy breaking you in. She could hear his boots clicking steadily across the concrete floor, each step measured and patient, like a metronome counting down to her doom. He was enjoying this hunt, the sadistic bastard. 3 days of chasing her through the Nevada desert had only sharpened his appetite for the final capture. But what he didn't understand, what none of these primitive humans could comprehend, was that he had never been the hunter in this equation. From the moment she had allowed herself to be captured, he had been the prey, dancing to her tune. Ariana closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, deeply, drawing air into lungs that had adapted to this world's harsh atmosphere. Over long months of captivity, the blue glow beneath her skin pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a soft bioluminescence that had fascinated and terrified every human who had witnessed it. They thought it was some kind of exotic alien biology, a curiosity to be studied and exploited for their own purposes. They had no idea what it really represented, the visible manifestation of quantum energy fields that connected her consciousness to a network spanning multiple dimensions. The metal ring on her finger felt like a shackle forged from her own people's technology, its weight a constant reminder of the mock ceremony that had supposedly bound her to this monster 3 days ago. The band was warm against her skin, embedded with tracking technology and biometric sensors that made her visible to every scanner Cole's organization possessed. But what they didn't know, what their primitive understanding of physics prevented them from grasping, was that she had been allowing them to track her all along, leading them exactly where she wanted them to be for the final act of this elaborate performance. She opened her eyes and peered around the edge of the metal beam, her enhanced vision automatically adjusting to the dim emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly shades of red and amber. The facility stretched out before her like something from a nightmare designed by military contractors with unlimited budgets and no imagination. Endless corridors lined with broken equipment, emergency lights casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose, and the ever-present smell of rust and decay that marked humanity's tendency to abandon their creations the moment they became inconvenient. This place had been a government research installation once, back when the military still believed they could weaponize alien technology through conventional means. According to the files Jake had hacked from classified databases, it had housed Project Starfall, an ambitious attempt to reverse engineer technology from crashed extraterrestrial vessels. The project had been shut down after a series of catastrophic accidents that had left 47 researchers dead and the entire facility contaminated with exotic radiation that would make it uninhabitable for the next 2 centuries. Perfect for what she had planned. Cole's footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the soft whisper of steel as he drew another knife from his extensive collection. The man was obsessed with bladed weapons, convinced that primitive tools gave him some kind of psychological advantage over his targets. He collected antiques, medieval daggers, samurai swords, ritual knives from cultures that had disappeared centuries ago. Each blade had a story, usually involving someone who had died badly, while Cole watched and enjoyed their suffering. "I know you're here, sweetheart," Cole called out, his voice dripping with false endearment that made her skin crawl. "My thermal scanners picked up your heat signature the moment you entered this sector. There's nowhere left to run, and my men have every exit covered with orders to shoot on sight. Time to come home to your loving husband and accept your new life." Ariana's fingers found the jagged piece of rebar she had been carrying since her escape from the transport vehicle. It surfaced rough and cold against her palm, like the touch of honest violence. It wasn't much compared to Cole's professional arsenal of death, but she had learned to make do with whatever weapons this harsh world provided. Her people had been warriors on once, thousands of years ago. Before the long peace had made them soft and complacent, the skills were still there, buried in genetic memory and awakened by the necessity of survival in an environment that seemed designed to kill anything that didn't belong. She thought back to the auction 3 days ago, that underground chamber beneath the Nevada desert where they had put her on display like some exotic animal at a medieval fair. The memory still burned in her mind with crystal clarity. Hundreds of masked faces staring up at her from tiered seating, their eyes hungry with greed and darker desires that she didn't want to contemplate. Politicians whose campaigns she had seen on television, military contractors whose weapons killed thousands daily, wealthy collectors whose private museums were filled with artifacts stolen from cultures they had helped destroy, all gathered in one place to bid on the ultimate prize, a living, breathing alien who could be owned, studied, and exploited without consequence. The auction house itself had been a marvel of criminal engineering, built into a natural cave system that had been expanded and reinforced over decades of illegal activity. The main chamber could hold over 1,000 people, with secondary rooms for private negotiations and holding cells for merchandise that wasn't quite ready for public display. Climate-controlled, soundproofed, and equipped with enough security technology to rival a government installation. The perfect venue for the kind of business that couldn't be conducted in the light of day. The auctioneer had been a thin, Man with dead eyes and a voice like oil. Poured over broken glass, his expensive suit unable to hide the predator beneath. The civilized veneer, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished biters, we come now to the crown jewel of tonight's collection. Lot number 7 represents a truly unique opportunity, the sole surviving extraterrestrial from the crash incident 6 months ago, fully intact and medically verified as biologically compatible with human physiology, Bluekind enhanced physical capabilities, estimated age 25 Earth years according to our xenobiological consultants, starting bid $1 million. The numbers had climbed with sickening inevitability, each increase representing another layer of chains. They planned to wrap around her, 5 million. 10, 15, 20. The crowd had murmured and whispered among themselves, discussing her potential uses as if she were livestock being prepared for slaughter. Some wanted her for research. They spoke of genetic sampling, psychological experiments, studies in alien reproduction. Others had darker interests, their comments making it clear they saw her as the ultimate exotic companion for their private collection. Magnificent specimen, she had heard one masked woman say to her companion, her voice cultured and educated in the way that only came from generations of inherited wealth. Think of the research possibilities. We could learn so much about their physiology, their psychology, their breeding habits. I'm more interested in the entertainment value, the man had replied with a laugh that made Ariana's skin crawl. Imagine the parties we could throw with something like that as the centerpiece. Our friends would be so jealous. They had talked about her like she wasn't there, like she couldn't understand every word they spoke. That had been their first mistake, but not their last. They saw blue skin and alien features and assumed she was some primitive savage who couldn't comprehend their sophisticated human culture. They had no idea she had been studying their species for months, learning their weaknesses and cataloging their fears with the patience of a scientist preparing for a complex experiment. Cole Martinez had won the bidding at $23 million, outbidding a consortium of government scientists and a private collector who specialized in what he euphemistically called exotic companions. Cole was different from the others, where they saw research subjects or playthings. He saw something far more personal. He saw a trophy that would cement his reputation as the ultimate hunter, the man who had captured and tamed an actual alien. He had climbed onto the stage as the crowd erupted in applause, his scarred face twisted into a triumphant grin that revealed too many teeth. Up close he smelled like gun oil and violence, his hands rough and calloused from years of hunting things that couldn't effectively fight back. The scars that covered his arms and chest told the story of a man who enjoyed getting close to his prey, who preferred the intimacy of blade work to the distant efficiency of firearms. She's not just a trophy, he had announced to the cheering crowd, his voice carrying easily in the acoustically perfect chamber. She's going to be my wife, the ultimate conquest, an alien bride who learned to love her new life on Earth. The crowd had erupted in laughter and applause, delighted by the audacity of the idea. Someone had shouted, "Kiss the bride," and others had taken up the chant until the chamber echoed with their cruel amusement. They thought it was the ultimate joke, forcing an alien refugee into marriage with her captor. The irony was lost on them that they were witnessing the opening act of their own destruction. Cole had leaned close to her, then close enough that she could feel his breath against her ear and smell the cologne he wore to mask the scent of death that clung to everything he touched. You're mine now, little blue angel, body and soul. I'm going to teach you things your alien friends never dreamed of, and if you're very, very good, I might even let you enjoy some of it. That was when Ariana had smiled for the first time since her capture, a cold expression that should have warned him he was making a terrible mistake. But Cole had been too drunk on his victory to notice the predator's gleam in her alien eyes, too consumed with his own triumph to recognize that he was staring into the face of his own doom. The mock wedding ceremony had taken place in an underground chapel that had been decorated to parody traditional human marriage customs. They had dressed her in a silver gown that shimmered like liquid metal, its fabric embedded with tracking fibers and biometric sensors that would monitor her vital signs and location 24 hours a day. Every thread was a leash, every sequin a tiny prison, designed to remind her of her new status as property. Cole had written his own vows for the occasion, a twisted parody of traditional marriage promises that had made the gathered crowd laugh and cheer. Cole Martinez, take you alien. Designation X7, to be my lawful wedded property, to have and to hold, to command and control, to use and abuse as I see fit. You will honor and obey me in all things, and in return I promise to keep you alive, and as long as you continue to the priest had been a terrified man who had clearly been paid enough to perform the service without asking too many questions about the legality or morality of what he was doing. His hands had shaken as he spoke the words that would supposedly bind them together, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the underground chamber. Do you, Cole Martinez, take this person to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Cole had replied with obvious relish. And do you? The priest had faltered, looking at Ariana with obvious distress. Do you take Cole Martinez to be your lawfully wedded husband? Ariana had remained silent, her expression carefully neutral despite the rage burning in her chest. Let them think her broken. Let them believe their ceremony had meaning. Snorts, the truth would become apparent soon enough. She's a little shy, Cole had said with a laugh, but I'll take silence as consent. We can work on her communication skills during the honeymoon. He had slipped the ring onto her finger himself, a band of alien metal that had been salvaged from her ship's wreckage and fashioned into jewelry by craftsmen who had no idea what they were working with. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were using pieces of her own vessel to forge her chains, technology her people had developed to travel between stars, now repurposed to bind one of their own to a planet of savages. With this ring, I claim, Cole had said, his own bastardized version of traditional wedding vows. You are mine now, completely and forever, my property, my prize, my perfect alien wife. And if anyone tries to take you from me, they'll learn why they call me the best hunter in North America. The gathered crowd had cheered and taken pictures, treating the whole thing like some elaborate costume party thrown by people with more money than sense. They had no idea they were witnessing the opening act of their own destruction, the first scene in a drama that would end with their empire of human misery crashing down around their ears. Now, Crouched behind rusted equipment in this abandoned facility, Ariana could feel the quantum resonators in the ring beginning to warm against her skin. Process was subtle, invisible to human instrument, but she could sense the gradual buildup of exotic energy as the alien metal interfaced with the crystalline matrix that had been implanted in her heart before her ship's departure. Her people had been thorough in their preparations for this mission. The crash of her vessel hadn't been an accident, it had been a carefully orchestrated sacrifice designed to place her exactly where she needed to be at precisely the right moment. Everything that had happened since, from her capture to the medical examinations to the auction to this final confrontation, had been guided by a plan that spanned dimensions and defied human understanding of cause and effect. Her people called it the long game, strategy that thought in terms of centuries rather than moments, that viewed individual lives as moves on a board too vast for lesser species to comprehend. The humans thought they had captured a refugee, a survivor of a tragic accident who could be exploited for their own purposes. They had actually captured a living weapon designed to prevent their expansion into the wider universe, a quantum bomb wrapped in blue skin and alien beauty. Cole's footsteps stopped just around the corner from her hiding place, so close she could hear his breathing, slow and controlled, the patient rhythm of a predator preparing to strike. He thought he had cornered his prey, but he was about to learn that some prey fought back with weapons beyond his understanding. Last chance, sweetheart, Cole called out softly, his voice taking on a coaxing quality that somehow made his words even more threatening. Come out now and I'll make sure your punishment is gentle. Keep running and I'll have to get creative with my discipline. Trust me, you don't want me to get creative. She had seen examples of Cole's creativity during her captivity, had been forced to watch as he demonstrated his techniques on other prisoners who had displeased him. The man was an artist when it came to inflicting pain, capable of keeping his victims conscious and screaming for hours before finally allowing them the mercy of death. His reputation in certain circles was well deserved. Ariana gripped the rebar tighter and prepared to move, her enhanced muscles coiling like springs, ready to release their stored energy. She had been studying human combat techniques during her captivity, watching guard rotations and analyzing their tactical responses with a detached interest of a xenobiologist studying a particularly violent species of insect. They were strong and well-armed, but they were also predictable in the way that all primitive species were predictable. They expected their victims to run, to hide, to beg for mercy. They didn't expect them to attack with the cold efficiency of apex predators. She rolled out from behind the beam just as Cole rounded the corner, his favorite knife held ready for a killing stroke that would open her throat from ear to ear. His eyes widened in surprise as she came at him low and fast, the improvised spear aimed at his center mass with surgical precision. Professional training kicked in and he twisted aside at the last second, but not quickly enough to avoid all damage. The rebar caught him in the shoulder, punching through expensive body armor and Milidar clothing to scrape against bone. Snorts. Cole roared in pain and anger, his knife slashing down toward her neck in a retaliatory strike that would have decapitated a normal human. Ariana ducked under the blade and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, with enough force to crack ribs, doubling him over before he could recover from the stunning blow. She brought her knee up into his face with bone-crushing force that sent blood spraying from his broken nose. Cole staggered backward but didn't go down. Years of military training and battlefield experience giving him the kind of toughness that didn't fold at the first sign of real resistance. He spit blood and grinning at her with crimson teeth, his eyes bright with the kind of violence that most humans only dreamed about in their darkest nightmares. "There's my little fighter," he wheezed, raising his knife again, despite the blood streaming down his face. "I was hoping you'd show some spirit. Breaking you is going to be so much more satisfying now that I know you've got some fight left in you." They circled each other wearily in the dim emergency lighting. Predator and prey roles suddenly reversed in a way that neither of them had expected. Cole was bigger, stronger, and armed with a proper weapon designed specifically for killing, but Ariana had advantages he couldn't see and wouldn't understand until it was far too late. Her alien physiology gave her enhanced reflexes and endurance that put her in a completely different league from human opponents, while months of captivity had taught her to think 3 moves ahead of her captors at all times. "You can't win this," Cole said, his voice thick with blood and barely controlled rage. "My men have this place surrounded with orders to shoot on sight if you somehow manage to get past me. Even if you kill me, which you won't, they'll hunt you down and make you pay for every drop of blood you've spilled tonight. Your men are already dead," Ariana replied with a calm certainty of someone stating an obvious fact, though it wasn't entirely true. "Not yet anyway, but it would be soon enough." Cole's confident expression faltered slightly as her words sank in. An NBSB. I just spoke to them 20 minutes ago. They're in position and ready to move on my signal. 20 minutes is a long time in a war zone, Ariana observed. "Anything can happen when you're dealing with forces beyond your understanding." She wasn't lying about the war zone part. This facility was about to become ground zero for something that would reshape the balance of power on this entire planet, an event that would make humanity's first contact with alien intelligence a story told in terms of justice rather than conquest. But Cole didn't need to know that yet. The revelation would be so much more satisfying when it came as a complete surprise. He lunged at her again, the knife cutting through the air in a vicious arc aimed at her throat with professional precision. Ariana swayed aside and grabbed his wrist, using his own momentum to send him crashing into a bank of rusted machinery that had been abandoned when the facility was evacuated. Sparks flew as metal struck metal with tremendous force, illuminating Cole's face in brief flashes of orange and gold that made him look like a demon emerging from the flames of hell. "How?" he gasped, struggling to free his knife hand from her grip while trying to ignore the pain of what felt like several broken ribs. "You're just some refugee who got lucky in a ship crash. You shouldn't be able to fight like this. You shouldn't be strong enough to match me. Maybe I'm not what you think I am," Ariana suggested, with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever, tightening her hold until she could hear the small bones in his wrist beginning to creak under the pressure. Cole's face went pale as understanding began to dawn like a sunrise over a battlefield. The crash Wasn't an accident, was it? Very good, I was starting to think you were too stupid to figure it out, she released his wrist and stepped back, giving him room to think about the implications. While she prepared for his next move, Cole clutched his injured arm to his chest, his knife forgotten on the floor beside him where it had fallen during their struggle. For the first time since she had known him, real fear flickered in his eyes like candlelight in a hurricane. If the crash was planned, then he trailed off as the full scope of the deception became clear in his mind. Jesus Christ, you're not a survivor at all, you're an operative. I prefer the term advanced scout, but yes, that's essentially correct. My people have been watching your species for quite some time, Cole. We've been taking notes, learning your patterns, studying your weaknesses like entomologists, examining a particularly violent species of insect, and what we've learned has been very instructive indeed. The sound of footsteps echoed from deeper in the facility, multiple sets moving with military precision and tactical awareness. Cole's backup was finally arriving, drawn by the sounds of combat, like carrying birds drawn to fresh meat. But they weren't the only ones converging on this location. Other forces were moving in the shadows, forces that Cole's primitive understanding of reality couldn't even begin to comprehend. Ariana closed her eyes and felt for the quantum signature of her true allies, the dimensional resonance that connected her consciousness to beings who existed partially outside normal space. Jake, Sophia, and Mia were in position there, modified human technology interfacing perfectly with her people's dimensional manipulation systems. Everything was proceeding according to a plan that had been years in the making. They're coming, Cole said, relief flooding his voice as he heard his men approaching through the maze of corridors and abandoned equipment. You fought well. I'll give you that, better than I expected from an alien refugee, but it's over now. You're outnumbered and outgunned, and my boys don't take prisoners when their boss has been injured. Numbers aren't everything. Ariana replied calmly and pressed her hand against the metal ring on her finger. The quantum resonators activated with a sound like reality tearing at the seems, a harmonic frequency that existed in dimensions human ears weren't designed to perceive. The air around Ariana shimmered and bent, space folding in on itself as carefully maintained barriers between worlds began to dissolve. For a brief moment, Cole could see through her eyes to the vast network of starships hanging in the space between spaces, their crews waiting patiently for her signal to begin the next phase of operations. Impossible, he was, his voice barely audible above the growing harmonic resonance. Your ship crashed. Your people are dead. We saw the debris field, analyzed the wreckage. There's nothing left of your civilization but scattered metal and alien corpses. My ship crashed because we wanted it to, Ariana explained with the patience of a teacher instructing a particularly slow student. My people appear dead because we wanted them to appear dead. Everything that has happened to me, everything I have endured during my months of captivity has been in service of a single goal that your species lacks: the imagination to comprehend. Which is Ariana's smile was cold and final, the expression of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment of revelation, the complete exposure and systematic elimination of human trafficking networks on this planet. starting with the charming individuals who attended my auction and extending outward to encompass every person, organization, and government agency that profits from the sale of sentient beings. The first of Cole's men appeared at the far end of the quarter, their rifles trained on Ariana's position with professional competence. They were good soldiers, well equipped and disciplined, veterans of conflicts where human beings had fought other human beings for resources and territory, but they were still thinking in terms of conventional, three-dimensional warfare, still operating under the assumption that their enemy was bound by the same physical laws that govern their own existence. "Stand down," Cole shouted to them, his voice cracking with desperation as he began to understand the true scope of what he was facing. "She's not what we thought. She's more dangerous than anything we've ever encountered." But his warning came too late. Ariana pressed the ring again, and the fabric of space twisted around her like a living thing, folding and distorting until she seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously. One moment she was standing in front of Cole, the next she was behind the lead soldier with a commandeered knife sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering uselessly to the floor as his nervous system shut down. His companion spun around in confusion and fear, trying to target an enemy who could apparently teleport at will through dimensions they couldn't even perceive. Contact, she's not human," one of them screamed into his radio, his voice high and thin with terror. "Repeat, target is not human. We need immediate backup and heavy weapons. She's some kind of an NBSP monster." Ariana moved through them like death incarnate, her enhanced speed and reflexes making her appear as little more than a blue blur in the emergency lighting. Another soldier fell with his throat open from ear to ear, then another with his spine severed at the base of his skull. Their high-tech equipment was useless against an enemy who fought by rules they didn't understand, who could step partially out of their reality whenever it suited her purposes. The last man standing tried to run, but Ariana was already there, blocking his escape route with the cold efficiency of an apex predator that had never known defeat. He raised his rifle desperately, finger tightening on the trigger, but she moved faster than human eyes could follow. The weapon spun away into the darkness, its owner collapsing with a broken neck that would never heal. Silence settled over the facility like a funeral shroud, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the soft drip of blood on concrete. Cole stared at the bodies of his men, his face white with shock and growing terror. In less than 5 minutes, his professional military team had been reduced to meat and memories by something that looked like a refugee in a torn wedding dress. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own terrified breathing. "I am the consequence of your actions," Ariana replied, walking slowly back toward him like justice personified. "I am what happens when you mistake compassion for weakness, when you confuse mercy with helplessness. I am the price your species pays for trafficking in sentient beings, for treating conscious creatures like property to be bought and sold." She knelt down and picked up Cole's dropped knife, testing its balance with the professional interest of someone who had been trained to kill with whatever tools were available. The blade was well made, sharp enough to cut through bone, perfectly weighted for both slashing and thrusting attacks, a quality instrument. For quality work, the auction, Cole said. Suddenly, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking together in his terrified mind. The other buyers, the politicians, the collectors, you know who they are, don't you? Names, addresses, financial records, personal communications, family members, business associate, sexual preferences, psychological profiles. Ever since, my allies have been very busy while you've been chasing me through the desert like some amateur weekend hunter. Jake Morrison's voice crackled over a radio. Cole didn't know he was carrying the sound, making him jump like a startled animal. Package delivered. We're in position and ready to begin phase 2 of operations. Cole spun around, confusion and anger wearing across his blood-streaked face like opposing armies fighting for control of the same territory. You son of an NBSB and NBSB. You were working with her the whole time, weren't you? The garage, the rescue, all of it was staged, actually. Jake replied, his voice calm and professional despite the circumstances. We've been working with each other from the beginning. It's funny how that works out when you're all fighting for the same cause instead of trying to profit from other people's misery, which is justice. Sophia Chen's voice joined the conversation, her tone carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much suffering and decided to do something about it. Real justice for every person who has ever been bought, sold, traded, or treated like property by scum like you and your associates. Mia Rodriguez added her own commentary from somewhere in the electronic ether. Plus, we really wanted to see the looks on your faces when you realized how badly you had been played. It's amazing what people will put on their computers when they think they're anonymous and untouchable. Ariana could see the full scope of the deception finally sinking into Cole's consciousness like acid eating through metal. The garage where she had supposedly taken refuge after her escape, the helpful humans who had seemingly risked everything to protect a refugee they barely knew, the dramatic chase through the Nevada wilderness that had led them to this abandoned facility. All of it had been theater, a carefully choreographed performance designed to flush out the worst elements of the human trafficking industry and expose them to the light of justice. How long? Cole asked hoarsely, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this operation? Since before my ship ever entered your atmosphere, Ariana replied with the satisfaction of someone who had waited years for this moment of revelation. We've been monitoring your planet's communications for decades. Cole, radio transmissions, internet traffic, satellite data, classified government files. We know about the black markets, the auction houses, the private collectors who specialize in exotic merchandise. We know about the government programs that turn a blind eye to trafficking as long as the victims aren't technically human. According to your narrow definition of personhood. She stood up and began walking slowly around Cole's position, the knife held casually in her hand like an extension of her own will. He turned to keep her in sight, but she could see the trapped animal desperation beginning to build behind his eyes like pressure in a boiler about to explode. We also know about the resistance networks, she continued, enjoying the way his face palled with each revelation. The people like Jake, Sophia, and Mia who risk everything to help victims escape from Monsters like you, underground. Railroad safe houses extraction. Teams. They were the ones who contacted my people first, asking for help in a war they couldn't win alone with their primitive technology and limited resources, so you crashed your ship and let yourself be captured just to infiltrate the trafficking networks. That's insane. No rational being would take that kind of risk. Risk implies uncertainty about the outcome, Ariana Clear's throat replied. There was never any uncertainty about what would happen. Here tonight, the only variable was whether you and your associates would be intelligent enough to surrender gracefully when the time came. Cole's hand moved slowly toward a concealed weapon at the small of his back. Backup pistol he kept for emergencies. Exactly like this one. Ariana saw the motion but let it continue. Curious to see how far his desperation would drive him. She wanted him to feel like he still had options right up until the moment she took them all away. Auction was the real prize, she said, continuing her slow circuit around his increasingly panicked uniform, a gathering of every major player in the North American trafficking industry all in one place at one time. Names, faces, financial connections, communication protocols, blackmail material, evidence of other crimes. My people have been documenting everything with the thoroughness of scientists cataloging a new species of particularly noxious parasite. Your people, Cole repeated, his fingers closing around the handle of his backup pistol. How many of you are there? Really, how big is this operation? Big enough, Ariana replied with deliberate vagueness. More than enough to handle a primitive species that still thinks violence is the solution to every problem. Cole drew the gun and fired in one smooth motion, his military training taking over despite the terror that was eating away at his sanity like acid. Muzzle flash lit up his desperate face like a camera strobe, revealing features twisted by fear and rage into something barely recognizable as human. But Ariana was already moving, the quantum field around her bending space and time just enough to make his bullets pass harmlessly through empty air where she had been standing a microsecond before. She materialized behind him and drove the knife between his shoulder blades. With surgical precision, the blade punching through body armor and bone to sever his spinal cord at exactly the right vertebrae. Cole screamed and fell forward, his legs suddenly refusing to support his weight as his nervous system shut down below the point of injury. The gun clattered away across the concrete floor, useless now that his hands could no longer grip it properly. The spinal cord is severed at the T12 vertebrae, Ariana said clinically as she knelt beside his paralyzed form, her voice taking on the detached tone of a medical examiner describing an autopsy. You'll live, but you'll never walk again. Poetic justice for a man who made his living hunting things that couldn't run fast enough to escape his primitive weapons. Cole's face was pressed against the cold concrete, his breath coming in short, agonized gasp that misted in the facility's chilled air. You can't just leave me here like this. I'll die of exposure before anyone finds me. I'm not leaving you here, Ariana assured him with mock kindness. My friends will be along shortly to collect you, along with any evidence that might lead to additional arrests. Then you'll be transported to a very special facility where you'll spend the rest of your life answering questions about your business associates and their operations. What kind of facility? Ariana's smile was cold and utterly without mercy. The expression of someone who had seen too much suffering to feel sympathy for those who caused it, the kind run by. People who take trafficking crimes very personally, people who have lost friends, family members, entire communities to monsters like you. They're going to be very interested in everything you know about the industry. She stood up and activated the quantum communicator built into her ring, the device interfacing seamlessly with communication networks that span multiple dimensions. Jake, Sophia, and Mia would be monitoring the frequency, waiting for her all-clear signal before beginning the next phase of operations. What happened next would make everything they had accomplished so far look like gentle warm-up exercise. Status report. Jake's voice crackled over the comm channel, partially distorted by the exotic physics involved in dimensional communication. Primary target neutralized and secured, Ariana replied with professional satisfaction. Site is clear and ready for cleanup. Operations, no complications. Encountered, copy that. Extraction team is en route to your position with medical support, ETA 5 minutes. What about the secondary targets? Simultaneously raided by federal agents. Based on the evidence packages we've been distributing for the past 72 hours, arrest warrants have been issued for all auction participants, and international authorities are moving to freeze their assets. Several governments are also launching investigations into their own officials who appear on our lists. Ariana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as months of planning and preparation finally paid dividends. Trafficking network that had seemed so untouchable, so deeply entrenched in the power structures of human civilization, was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption like a house built on sand. Cole was still conscious despite his injuries, his face gray with pain and shock. It won't work, he gasped, his voice barely audible above the sound of approaching vehicles. The people we work for have too much power, too many connections in high places. They'll find a way to make this all disappear. Cover it up like it never happened, maybe. Ariana agreed with apparent unconcern. But they'll have to do it while looking over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. Because now they know we're watching, now they know that their victims might not be as helpless as they appear, that some of them have friends with resources beyond human understanding. The sound of vehicles approaching echoed through the facility like thunder, multiple engines running at different speeds and power levels. Some were moving fast with the urgency of military operations, others proceeding more cautiously as if their occupants were unsure of what they might find. The extraction team was arriving right on schedule, along with what sounded like federal law and enforcement backup and possibly some kind of medical support unit. Time to go, Ariana said, checking her improvised weapons and preparing to move toward the rendezvous point. Try not to bleed to death before the medics arrive. You are much more valuable alive than dead, and there are a lot of people who want to have very long conversations with you about your business practices. She walked toward the facility's main exit, leaving Cole paralyzed and helpless on the concrete floor like a broken toy, discarded by a child who had grown tired of playing with it. Behind her, she could hear him trying to call out, but his voice was weak and his words were lost in the cavernous space of the abandoned research complex, the Nevada. Night air was cold and clean when she emerged from the facility, nothing like the recycled atmosphere of starships or the stale air of underground auction houses. Stars glittered overhead in patterns that had become familiar during her months on this world, constellations that told the story of a planet spinning through space in blissful ignorance of the cosmic community that surrounded it. Jake's pickup truck was waiting in the parking lot exactly where it was supposed to be, engine running and clears throat, doors open like the getaway vehicle in some elaborate heist movie. Sophia sat in the passenger seat with a comprehensive medical kit ready, while Mia monitored a dozen different communication channels from the back seat, surrounded by electronic equipment that looked like it belonged on a starship bridge. They had all changed out of their civilian clothes into tactical gear that marked them as members of something far more serious than a simple rescue operation. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked as Ariana climbed into the vehicle, her medical training immediately assessing visible injuries and stress indicators. "Like I need a shower, about 12 hours of sleep, and maybe a vacation on a planet where the dominant species doesn't buy and sell each other like livestock," Ariana replied honestly, settling into her seat with a sigh of exhaustion. "Clears throat, but mostly I feel relieved. This part of the mission is finally over." "This part?" Jake asked as he put the truck in gear and began driving away from the facility at a speed that wouldn't attract attention from law enforcement. "There are more parts to this operation." "Oh yes," Ariana said, leaning back and closing her eyes as the facility disappeared in the rear view mirror. Cole and his auction were just the beginning. There are trafficking networks on 6 continents, and most of them are about to have very bad days when they discover their communications have been compromised and their operations have been exposed. Behind them, the abandoned research facility was suddenly blazing with activity as federal agents and military personnel swarmed the building like antibodies attacking an infection. Helicopters circled overhead while armored vehicles blocked every access road. Cole would be in custody within minutes, along with any evidence that might lead to additional arrests and prosecutions. "What happens now?" Mia asked, still monitoring the radio chatter from various law enforcement agencies as they coordinated their response to the night's events. "Now we go home and watch the news coverage," Ariana replied with satisfaction. "This story is going to be all over the media within hours." Federal raids break up international trafficking ring. Alien refugee helps expose human rights violations. Government officials arrested in massive corruption scandal. That sort of thing. And after the media circus dies down, Ariana looked out the window at the Nevada landscape rolling past in the pre-dawn darkness, desert stretching to the horizon in all directions like an ocean of sand and stone. It was beautiful in its own harsh way. This alien world that had somehow become familiar during her time here. Beautiful and utterly unforgiving too. Anything that didn't belong or couldn't adapt to its demands. "After that we get back to work," she said quietly. "There are a lot more monsters out there, and they're all going to be much more careful now that they know we're hunting them. We'll need to be smarter, more creative, more patient than we've ever been before." "Sounds like you're planning to stick around, Jake observed, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Earth is where the work is, Ariana replied without hesitation. My people can handle the diplomatic negotiations and interplanetary legal proceedings from a safe distance. But someone needs to be here on the ground, making sure that people like Cole don't just set up shop somewhere else and continue their operations. They drove in companionable silence for several miles, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead of them. The trafficking network they had just dismantled was enormous by human standards, but it was far from the only one operating on the planet. There would be more auctions, more monsters, more victims who needed someone to stand up for them when their own governments failed to protect them. But there would also be more people like Jake, Sophia, and Mia, humans who were willing to risk everything to do the right thing, even when the odds seemed impossible and the consequences could be fatal. That gave Ariana hope for the future of both their species. Her ring began to warm against her finger as incoming communications activated the quantum resonators, carrying messages from across the dimensional barriers that separated this reality from her people's home. Reports were coming in from similar operations on other continents, trafficking networks collapsing like houses of cards, victims being freed from captivity, monsters facing justice for the first time in their miserable careers. Jake, she said suddenly, pull over at the next rest suite. I need to make a call, he complied, without question, finding a deserted truck stop that provided enough privacy for whatever kind of communication she had in mind. Ariana walked a short distance away from the vehicle and pressed both hands against her ring, activating quantum channels that connected her consciousness to beings who existed partially outside normal space. The response was immediate and overwhelming, dozens of voices speaking simultaneously in harmonics that human ears couldn't perceive, carrying information at speeds that defied conventional physics. Her people were pleased with the night's work, satisfied that the first phase of operations had proceeded according to plan, but they were also concerned about her decision to remain on Earth rather than return to the safety of home dimension. The work was dangerous, they reminded her, and the humans were unpredictable in their responses to threats they didn't understand. Ariana listened to their concerns with the patience of someone who had already made up her mind. Then she sent back her own message, carrying with it images and emotions that conveyed her thoughts more completely than words ever could. She would stay because the work was important, because there were people here who needed her help, because she had found something on this harsh world that she hadn't expected to find. She had found a cause worth fighting for and allies worth dying beside. Snorts when she returned to the truck. Jake, Sophia, and Mia were waiting with expressions of curiosity and concern on their faces. Everything okay? Sophia asked. Everything's fine, Ariana replied, settling back into her seat. I was just letting my people know that I'll be staying here for the foreseeable future. Any regrets about that decision? Jake asked as he started the engine. None whatsoever, Ariana said firmly. This is where I'm needed and this is where I belong. As they continued down the desert highway toward whatever came next, Ariana allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. not just for the success of their mission, but for the possibility that two very different species might learn to work together towards something better than either could achieve alone. The Clear's throat ring on her finger pulsed gently with residual quantum energy, a reminder of the forces that had brought her to this moment in this place. It was no longer a shackle binding her to a monster's will. It had become a symbol of the bond she had chosen to forge with people who shared her vision of justice. Behind them, dawn was beginning to break over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Ariana of home. But this was home now, this harsh and beautiful world where humans struggled against their own worst instincts and occasionally succeeded in choosing hope over fear. The hunt would continue, but the hunters had changed, and that made all the difference in the world. Cole Martinez lay strapped to a medical gurney in the back of an armored transport vehicle, his world reduced to the sterile white ceiling above his paralyzed form and the steady beeping of monitoring equipment that tracked his vital signs. The paralysis was complete. From the chest down, Ariana had chosen her target with surgical precision, severing his spinal cord at exactly the right point to leave him alive but helpless. His hands could still move. His arms retained some function, but his legs would never again carry him in pursuit of fleeing prey. The federal agents assigned to his transport maintained professional silence, but Cole could see the disgust in their eyes. When they looked at him, they had seen the evidence files that Ariana's team had compiled: photographs, video recordings, financial records, testimonials from victims who had survived his attentions. The scope of his crimes was staggering, even by the standards of law enforcement professionals who dealt with the worst of humanity on a daily basis. "Where are you taking me?" Cole asked for the 12th time, his voice from shouting threats and demands that no one seemed interested in acknowledging. Agent Sarah Morrison, no relation to Jake despite the shared surname, finally looked up from her tablet computer where she had been reviewing arrest reports from around the globe. "Does it matter? Never going to see the outside of a prison cell again, Martinez. The only question is whether you'll be in solitary confinement for your own protection or general population, where the other inmates can express their opinions about child traffickers." Cole's blood ran cold at the mention of other prisoners. He had heard stories about what happened to people like him in prison, how even hardened criminals drew the line at certain types of crimes. Men who had killed for money, sold drugs to children, robbed banks at gunpoint. They all looked down on traffickers with the special hatred reserved for those who profited from the suffering of the innocent. "I want to make a deal," he said desperately. "I have information, names, locations, people in government, military contractors, private collectors. I can give you everything you already have," Agent Morrison replied with cold satisfaction. Your alien friend was very thorough in her data collection, financial records, communication intercepts, blackmail files, business associates, personal habits. "We have everything we need to dismantle your entire network without your cooperation." She turned her tablet around to show him a map of North America dotted with red markers, each one representing a simultaneous raid in progress. As he watched, more markers appeared in real time as additional operations were launched based on Intelligence gathered from previous arrest, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Lowe's. Angels, Denver, Chicago, Miami, New York, Montreal, Toronto, Agent Morrison. Read from her screen, 47 simultaneous raids across 2 countries with more being planned as we speak. Your little auction was very informative. We had no idea the trafficking networks were so well organized or so extensive. Cole stared at the map in growing horror as the scope of the disaster became clear. Each red marker represented years of careful relationship building, financial investments, business partnerships that had taken decades to establish. His entire life's work is being systematically destroyed by people who had never even met him, all because he had been stupid enough to bid on an alien who turned out to be something far more dangerous than she appeared. The international operations are even more impressive, Agent Morrison continued. With evident satisfaction, Interpol has been very busy tonight. London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, Sao Paulo. It seems your alien friend has friends all over the world, and they've all been very busy gathering evidence. Through the small window in the transport vehicle, Cole could see the Nevada landscape rushing past in the growing daylight. They had been driving for over an hour, heading south toward what looked like military installations and government facilities. Wherever they were taking him, it wasn't a normal prison or detention center. The facility where you'll be staying is quite unique, Agent Morrison said, noticing his attention to the passing scenery. Originally designed for high-value terrorist suspects, but recently repurposed for a very special category of criminal, people who have committed crimes against non-human sentient beings. That's not a real crime category, Cole protested weakly. There are no laws about trafficking aliens. They're not legally considered people under any human legal system. There are. Now, Agent Morrison replied with a smile that held no warmth. Emergency legislation passed by Congress early this morning, retroactive to cover all crimes committed against extraterrestrial beings since first contact. Amazing how quickly politicians can move when they're properly motivated. Cole's mouth fell open as the implications sank in. Emergency legislation meant presidential executive orders, congressional emergency sessions, international treaty negotiations, all happening while he had been unconscious or distracted by his pursuit of Ariana. The scope of coordination required was staggering. How long has this been planned? He whispered. Longer than you can imagine, Agent Morrison replied. Your auction was just the final piece of a puzzle that's been years in the making. Every trafficking network, every corrupt official, every private collector who specializes in exotic merchandise, they've all been under surveillance by people with technology you can't comprehend. The transport vehicle began to slow as they approached a checkpoint, manned by soldiers in desert camouflage uniforms. Beyond the barriers, Cole could see a complex of low buildings surrounded by multiple layers of fencing, topped with razor wire. Guard towers were positioned at regular intervals, their occupants armed with military-grade weapons. Welcome to your new home, Agent Morrison clears throat, said as they passed through the final security checkpoint. Facility 7 Alpha, the nation's only maximum security prison designed specifically for crimes against non-human sentient beings. You'll be sharing space with some very Interesting people, war criminals who targeted alien refugees, scientists who conducted illegal experiments, collectors who kept sentient beings as pets. They're all very eager to meet you. Cole's blood turned to ice water in his veins as the full horror of his situation became clear. He wouldn't just be imprisoned, he would be imprisoned with other people exactly like himself. People who had built their lives on the exploitation and abuse of beings they considered inferior, people who understood exactly what he had done because they had done similar things themselves. The transport vehicle came to a stop in a concrete courtyard, surrounded by high walls topped with electrified wire. Prison guards in full tactical gear approached the vehicle, their faces hidden behind riot helmets and protective visors. They moved with the efficient professionalism of people who dealt with dangerous criminals on a daily basis. Any last words for the record? Agent Morrison asked as the guards began unloading medical equipment from the transport vehicle. Cole thought desperately for something to say, some final threat or curse that would make him feel like he retained some measure of control over the situation. But as they lifted his paralyzed body from the gurney and began wheeling him toward the prison entrance, only one word came to mind. How? Agent Morrison considered the question for a moment. You really want to know? Yes, because you forgot that some prey fights back, she replied simply, and because some prey has friends you never saw coming. The prison doors closed behind him with the finality of a tomb ceiling, leaving Cole Martinez to contemplate the ruins of his empire from a wheelchair in a cell designed to hold him until the day he died. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Jake's garage, Ariana stood before a quantum communicator that projected holographic images of her people's governing council. The assembled beings appeared as translucent blue figures, arranged in a perfect circle, their form shifting slightly as they existed, partially outside normal spacetime. The operation has exceeded all projected parameters, the council's speaker announced, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears couldn't perceive. Trafficking networks on 6 continents have been compromised with arrest rates approaching 97% efficiency. Government cooperation has been secured through diplomatic channels, and legal frameworks are being established to prevent future violations. What about the long-term monitoring? Ariana asked. We can't just shut down these networks and walk away. They'll rebuild, adapt, find new ways to operate. Monitoring stations are being established in major population centers. Another council member replied. Volunteer observers from compatible species will maintain surveillance of suspicious activities. Your human allies have also requested training in detection techniques and intervention protocols. Jake looked up from the computer terminal where he had been tracking news reports from around the world. The media coverage is incredible. International trafficking rings smashed by alien-human cooperation. New era of interessees justice begins. Historic legislation protects non-human rights. They're calling it the biggest law enforcement success in human history. Because it is, clears throat. Sophia said from her position at another terminal where she was coordinating with medical teams treating rescued victims. We freed over 3,000 beings from captivity in the last 48 hours. Humans, yes, but also members of 17 different non-human species that were being held illegally. Mia whistled softly as she reviewed financial data streaming across multiple screens. The money trail is unbelievable. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry that operated in complete secrecy for decades. Swiss bank accounts offshore, shell companies, government contracts, disguised as research funding. These people were incredibly well organized. We're being the operative phrase, Ariana observed with satisfaction. Most of those accounts have been frozen. The shell companies dissolved. The government contracts canceled. It's going to take them years to rebuild their financial networks, if they can do it at all. The quantum communicator chimed softly as new information arrived from the Council's intelligence networks. Additional operations were launching in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia as local authorities moved against trafficking organizations exposed by the data captured from Cole's network. There is one concern, the Council speaker said, her holographic form flickering as she accessed real-time intelligence reports. Some elements within human governments are expressing reluctance to fully cooperate with interspecies legal proceedings. They fear loss of sovereignty, foreign interference in domestic affairs. Let me handle that, Ariana replied confidently. I've learned quite a bit about human psychology during my time here. They respond well to demonstrations of mutual benefit and shared objectives. She turned to address Jake, Sophia, and Mia directly. How would you like to become official liaison between human law enforcement and interspecies crime prevention networks? The job comes with some interesting benefits: enhanced technology, protection from retaliation, access to intelligence resources that span multiple dimensions. Jake grinned widely. Does it pay well? Better than garage work, Ariana assured him. Plus, you get to travel to places that don't technically exist in normal space. I'm in, Sophia said immediately. If we can prevent even one more person from going through what we've seen in the last few days, it's worth any risk. Same here, Mia agreed. Besides, I've always wanted to hack alien computer systems. Think of the challenge. The quantum communicator displayed a new series of holographic maps showing trafficking routes that span multiple continents in several dimensions. The scope of the problem was staggering. Beings were being moved between realities, sold to collectors who existed in parallel universes, exploited by criminals who operated beyond the reach of any single government. The work is just beginning, the Council speaker warned. What we've accomplished in the last few days represents perhaps 10% of the total problem. The remaining networks will adapt, become more careful, more sophisticated in their operations. Then we'll adapt too, Ariana replied with quiet determination. We'll become more careful, more sophisticated, more patient than they ever imagined possible. She looked around at her human ally, Jake with his mechanical genius and unshakable loyalty, Sophia with her healing hands and compassionate heart, Mia with her technological wizardry and fierce independence. They had risked everything to help a stranger, and in doing so had changed the course of two civilizations. The Liberation Front is officially operational, she announced. Our mission is simple: find the monsters who trade in sentient beings, gather evidence of their crimes, and make sure justice is served regardless of which dimension they try to hide in. The quantum communicator began displaying real-time Intelligence reports from monitoring stations around the globe. New trafficking operations were being identified, criminal networks mapped, potential rescue operations planned. The work would never be finished, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it continued, that someone was watching. That Clear's throat the predators could never again assume their prey was helpless. Outside Jake's garage, the Nevada sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. That reminded Ariana of home, but this was home now, this harsh and beautiful world where humans struggled against their worst instincts and occasionally succeeded in choosing hope over fear. Cole Martinez sat in his wheelchair in a prison cell designed to hold him for the rest of his natural life, contemplating the wreckage of an empire built on suffering. His paralyzed legs would never again carry him in pursuit of fleeing prey. His hands would never again bind chains around unwilling victims. His voice would never again command the obedience of the terrified. He was no longer a hunter. He was barely even human, and somewhere in the Nevada desert, 4 friends were planning their next operation against monsters who thought themselves untouchable. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, but this time the prey had evolved into something far more dangerous than their predators had ever imagined. The universe was a very large place, full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But it had just become a little bit safer for anyone who valued freedom over chains, justice over profit, and hope over fear. The age of hunting sentient beings was ending. The age of liberation had begun.